Hi, everyone in Facebook land. It's Chris Natsky here with Black Belt Leadership Speaking and Coaching with your Mind of a Champion tip of the week. You know, I just think it's interesting how the things that can occur when we're kids can last with us for our entire lifetime and still have a profound impact on us now. As most of you know, I started my martial art training back when I was at the ripe old age of 10. And I was thinking about that recently, and I was thinking about how when I was growing up, where a lot of my buddies had sports heroes that were in football, baseball, basketball, my heroes were martial art heroes. These were the guys that were the world champions at the time. A couple of names in kickboxing, for instance, Bill Superfoot Wallace, who later became one of my instructors, I'm so proud to say. Also Joe Louis and Jeff Smith, who were world kickboxing champions. And so these were the people that I was following. And of course, I was following Mr. Chuck Norris. Now, what most of us, when we hear Chuck Norris, we think about his movies and we think about Walker, Texas Ranger. But during that time, when I first started martial art training in the early 70s, he had just begun his movie career, but he was really known as a national karate champion. Now, unlike kickboxing where they go full contact, what he was a national champion and a world champion, I believe, as well, was something called point fighting. So the two combatants are scoring off with each other, and they try to score a point real fast with a control technique, so they're not going to knock each other out. And whoever scores the point first is the winner. So it's kind of like a game of tag. Even though the techniques are powerful and striking, that's the way that it goes. And so anyway, I was thinking about this experience, and I'm giving you this as context because I wanted to share with you something about a book that I got from Mr. Norris, and this is the first printing right here for 1975. And when I read this as a 12-year-old, it had such a profound impact on me. I wanted to share with you today, 4.5 decades later. You see, what Norris talked about in here, his student John Robertson was writing the preface, and what he wrote about is something that Norris used to always say. And he said that, I'm gonna read just a little bit here because I think it's important. He said, without succumbing to what's commonly known as the ego trip, Chuck Norris rates extremely high in terms of self-confidence. He said he once remarked that he never lost a match. All right, so remember what I said, point fighting, they could score a point really quick, so everyone's going to lose matches. But he said he never lost a match. Well, his student Robertson looked at him and said, well, that's crazy, because he knew that he lost matches, and Chuck Norris would always admit to it. But this is what he said. He said, a man only loses a match when he broods over his loss. But if you can learn from that loss, it becomes a major victory and puts you one more rung up the ladder of achievement. I don't call that losing. 4.5 decades later, I still remember that lesson. He never lost a match because when he had the experience, he could learn from it, he could correct it, and then he could move forward from there. So that's what I want to talk about today because it really got me thinking is, how do I deal with my defeats? And am I using that same type of a philosophy in terms of looking when I have setbacks? Because many times it's difficult for me to do that. Probably is for you too. So I thought about 3 things that I'm going to be looking at really focusing on in my life, and I do, and I'd encourage you to do it as well. And the first thing is when we experience a defeat, when we experience a loss or something not happening the way we want our life, is the first thing is to forgive ourselves. Straight and simple. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I have failures in my life and things that don't work, it's really easy for me to beat myself up. And then when I beat myself up for beating myself up, right? It becomes this vicious cycle. And I remember back in 1998, when I was competing for the first time in the National Taekwondo Championships, I was sailing through the competition and I watched the guy I was going to be fighting in the finals. And I thought, I got this guy. I got him no problem. Went into the finals and you know what, I lost. And that loss was devastating for me. And in fact, it really stayed with me for months afterwards. But what I finally had to do is I knew if I was going to move forward, I had to forgive myself for that loss. Otherwise, I was going to continue moving through a life where he was beating me every day. And it was just going to stay with me. So where do you have an opportunity in your losses to forgive yourself? The second thing is to identify the lessons that are learned. So anytime that we have a loss, there's always going to be some sort of a lesson that we can glean from it. Now, I'm not a huge proponent of losing, but I got to admit, I had my share of it. Many of you know that I went to school at Northwestern University and played football. What you may not know is when I was there, is we were in the midst of setting the longest losing streak in major college football history. I don't even know the number. It's out of my consciousness, but it was awful. Sorry about that, just got a phone call. And what happened with that is, you could really get you down, but the fact of the matter is there were lessons to be learned in that. And one of the things that really was impactful for me when I was, in my life is when I went through divorce, and that was a huge defeat for me, just devastating for me. But when I started to step back and look at it, what I noticed was it gave me an opportunity to grow. I grew as a father, I grew as a human being. And the work that I'm actually doing today is entirely a result of me going through that growth process. So where do you have an opportunity to reframe some of those defeats that you had? And then finally, it's important to take a look at the things you can correct and take action on them. So, it's not just about one thing about having the awarenesses, but where can you course correct and move forward when you have those defeats? So in 1999, I came back, and when I was training for the national championships then, that loss was in the back of my mind. But after a while, I just had to accept it, and then I got to strategize what I learned from that loss, and then it became a fuel for me to do better. So where do you have an opportunity when you've had defeats to take a look at the learnings and then also strategize how you can learn from those moving forward to get what you want? So there you have it, my friends. There's my little take on, again, Mr. Chuck Norris from circa 1975 and some of the lessons I learned from martial arts. And hopefully you can use these too. Because remember, if we learn from our defeats, we can never really lose a match. So I'm Chris Natsky with Black Belt Leadership Speaking and Coaching. Thanks so much for joining me on this Mind of a Champion Tip of the Week. And please comment, like, and share on this. And if you have other topics you'd like me to share, please send those to me as well. We'll see you next week. Thanks.